Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. This is a Marin Parent Education webinar. This is our first webinar, so thanks for joining. I hope you all had a relatively easy time getting onto the Zoom link. We have a wonderful presentation by an expert from Chicago, whom I'll introduce in a moment. We'll have about a 1-hour presentation from Dr. Heitner, and then we plan to have about 15 minutes of questions at the end. If you all could keep your lines muted during the entire presentation, that would be very helpful. I know many of you are at home with your families, which is great, but we don't necessarily want to hear them during the presentation today. Also, if you have any questions that come up during the presentation, please go to the chat box. You just click chat and you should get a box opened up and you can send a question. You can even send it to everyone, or you can send it directly to Sarah Roberts, who is going to be then asking Dr. Heitner some of the questions towards the end of our time together. So let me quickly introduce, we have Devorah Heitner, who is the authority, who's the authority that parents turn to for empowering advice on raising resilient and kind kids in our always connected world. Devorah's TEDx, Empathy is the App, has been viewed over 64,000 times. Advocating for mentoring, not just monitoring, her work focuses on improving intergenerational understanding, repairing digital mistakes, increasing empathy in our digital interactions, and reframing digital reputation. Dr. Heitner is the author of Screenwise, Helping Kids Thrive and Survive in Their Digital World. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, Real Simple, and Time Magazine. She's delighted to be raising her own digital native in Chicago. We are extremely excited to have convinced Dr. Heitner to stay up late in Chicago to present to our community here in California tonight. So I didn't introduce myself. I'm Kavitha Trivedi. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Diversity Committee, and we're so happy to have Dr. Heitner present to us today. All right, so I'm gonna go on mute and I'm gonna turn it to you.
Okay, well, welcome and thank you so much for making the effort to tune in. And I know how hard it is, whether it's a webinar or a live event, to do anything on a school night as a parent other than just, survive, get dinner on the table and put your kids to bed. So right there with you. And I know too that in our world, it can be really challenging to keep on top of the experiences our kids are having in their digital worlds, because there's so many of them, right? That from the moment they grab a tablet out of our hands or grab our phones to when they get their own devices, through learning how to interact with one another via gaming. I think there's someone who needs to mute.
Please make sure to mute yourself.
Sorry. Shut down conversation, but I think it's a little hard. Okay, so there's so much, right? There's so much. So from our kids, gaming in a public server, to asking to maybe play games that we're unfamiliar with, to then social apps, questions about how and if our kids should have access to those apps. Many of these social apps are technically 13 and up, but we all know younger kids who are posting on YouTube and making TikTok videos and sharing on Snapchat. So I want to kind of talk about those things and also talk about some questions that can come up when other families use tech or to have different rules about tech or different access to tech than what we allow in our homes, how to deal with the way schools are using tech and incorporating it into learning. So these are some big questions. Okay, so tech really affects all of our lives, and it affects every aspect of our lives, because if I were to look at your phone, for example, I would see probably the people that you care about the most. I would see, your texting. I would see the people the news sites that you check. I would see all kinds of things about you. And that would help me understand your life, but it would also help me understand why you sometimes probably pick up on that complexity and that relationship that we have with these devices. That's why if you have a toddler, they'll bring you your phone from another room, and they very quickly have this kind of complex relationship with the devices that we share in families, as well as with their own devices if we choose to give them a device, right? They also invest it with a lot of importance because that's where their friends are, that's where their games are, that might be where their homework is. There's a lot of stuff going on, whether it's a tablet, a gaming device, a phone, a laptop, right? There's a lot going on in there. When I go around the country and actually talk to kids, what I find is that they're more critical about the ways that we use tech and about the ways they use tech. They're more self-reflexive than you might think. So a lot of us assume, that kids just love tech, that they just want to use any, that if you take a math worksheet and put it on an iPad, that they'll just love it more. Or that if you, instead of cooking with your kids, show them a video of cooking on YouTube, that they'll somehow will engage them because it's YouTube. And that's not necessarily the case. Kids are actually more critical and more discerning than we think. They like tech when it makes life more interesting, when it teaches them things that are funny, when it helps them connect with friends or learn things. But they don't like tech when their parents are distracted and annoyed, and they don't like tech when it's no fun. They don't like tech when it's.
I can't get audio out for video, so I just got audio.
Can you still hear me? Hello?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes.
They don't love tech just uncritically, right? They're not. So one of the things as parents that we can do is encourage their skepticism and their critiques of tech for when they don't like it, because that will help them learn to self-regulate. One of the things we want to do is help kids have a realistic portrait of, what is better in our lives because we can Skype our grandparents in another state or in another country. What is better in our lives that we can have access to all this incredible information, right? I think there's a lot of us who have tremendously benefited in our careers and our personal lives from technology. So we're not here to say this is terrible, but what are the additional stresses that tech can bring into our family life, into our children's lives? And these are the things we want to encourage them to think about and then make decisions about day-to-day life while reflecting on what's good and what's not good, what works for them and what doesn't work. So as our kids are growing up in the digital age, we really want to be aware of the things that they're viewing and connecting with. And you're not going to log the same number of minutes on every app or every game as your kids log, but you do want to understand the bigger picture. If your kid's really into Fortnite, you want to know about Fortnite. If your kid's really into FIFA, you want to know what that is. If your kid is really into any kind of application, certainly a YouTube channel, YouTube is kind of even a special case in terms of parental supervision. There's so much you need to know about YouTube. If your kids are really watching a lot of content there. But for sure, again, you're not going to necessarily log every minute of Wild Kratts or every minute of, Flash or whatever your kids are into. But you want to know the big characters, you want to know the big conflicts, you want to know, wow, is that show, too violent, too racy? Is there a reason I might not want my kid to watch this show now? Is there a reason this show doesn't, or this app doesn't fit into our lives? Same thing with games. You want to know enough about the game, even if your kid knows way more about it. You want to know enough about it to know, A, are you comfortable playing that with them playing it? B, are they playing it on a public server? Who are the other players? What's the community like? What's the sort of tenor and tone of that community? These are all things that we can learn from our kids. So I'm going to talk a lot this evening about mentoring versus monitoring. And a lot of mentoring is just, talking with kids, engaging with them, thinking about how scenarios and experiences that they're experiencing in their digital world relate to your family values, relate to other things you're teaching them. Okay, so another issue is sleep. And this is a huge issue. Sleep is huge. A lot of families tell me that their kids are exhausted, that their teachers are also telling me, for example, that kids are coming into class just super, super tired. And many kids find it really difficult to disconnect at night. Some of us may find it difficult to disconnect at night. We may stay up late and watch another episode of our show. We may have other, poor choices that we make that don't don't end well in terms of sleep, right? And our kids are in the same boat. We need to help our kids by thinking about really carefully whether devices belong in bedrooms. For most kids, it's probably better not to have a connecting device in the bedroom, and to help them also
Can you
really.
turn off the music, please? Can you turn off the music?
Hello?
Sorry, we're here. We're just gonna mute. There we go. Keep going, Devorah.
Okay, so we really want to think about sleep in relationship to connected devices, and make sure that our family sleep plan and the location of devices, makes sense. So then another thing to think about with sleep is also what kinds of experiences kids have. And some teenagers will say, well, my phone is my alarm clock. And even younger kids will say this, or my music device is my alarm clock. But of course, if you can get your child a music device, you can get them an alarm clock. And so, once your child outgrows you being their alarm clock, you want to get them just a device that only wakes them up. It's really good to have a device that just does that. You don't want to have a complex, exciting device that does more than wake them up, right? You want just to have that capability. And so the affordances of a digital device may be more than you need. And that's something to think about, right? So if you think, okay, well, I need a device that helps me, watch movies, but also helps me wake up in the morning, you may want to rethink that. Okay. So sleep is huge. And I would just take a survey in your family of if anyone is coming to school tired in the morning. Find out what your child's teacher thinks. Again, I'm hearing this a lot from educators, that kids are tired. So I mentioned mentoring over monitoring. This is a strategy that I'm suggesting for any family. And mentoring doesn't mean you need to be a tech expert. You do not need a PhD in Snapchat to mentor your kids in the digital age. You just need to stay curious about what they're doing, what they're interested in, what their friends are doing. If they're asking for a new app, if your kid's saying, I want to post this really funny video to TikTok, well, have them show you some other TikTok videos. What do they follow? What do they think is amusing? Why do they think that it's funny? What do they think the downsides could be of posting, right? These are conversations you can have with just curiosity. You don't need to be an expert at all. You can literally have never heard of TikTok and just have your kid bring it to you, and you can just be really curious. And you also don't need to make decisions yes or no in the moment. As a parent, you can say, I need more time to think about this, and I want to go read about it, and I want to talk to other parents about it, and I'll get back to you. If you know for sure something is a no, then obviously you can just let them know. But if you're not sure, don't feel pressured by your children to make a decision in the moment until you've had a chance to do your due diligence. That should save a lot of parents feel like they have to know everything, and they're coming to a webinar or a talk at their child's school feeling like I must learn everything. If you have, first grader right now, you probably don't need to know about, Snapchat, because your first grader hopefully, maybe isn't asking for that, but maybe there's a game that they want. So you want to stay where your kids are and not sort of focus on trying to know the whole landscape as much as you want to understand some specifics that your kids are into, and also what the implications are for your family, right? If your kid's really into the Star Wars trilogy right now, you want to understand like all these different offshoot shows that they want to watch. Well, what are some of the differences between those shows? What does Common Sense Media say about that show? What do other parents in your community say about that show? You don't have to give a green light right away just because it's Star Wars. Maybe there are some shows in the Marvel universe. Again, I have found, and I have a kid who's really into Marvel, that there's a huge range of the Marvel spinoffs, and some of them are more okay for my 10-year-old, and some of them are a little too intense and violent. Maybe they have too much torture, or maybe the focus on adult relationships and dating is a little too intense, and so he's less interested. So again, I don't have to familiarize myself with the whole universe of everything that's out there, because that would be really overwhelming. One of the challenges of parenting in the digital age now is that there is such a proliferation of media. Our parents just had a few networks to deal with, and maybe PBS, maybe cable if you're younger than me, but they didn't have quite as much to choose from. And so now, our kids are in a situation where there's just endless amounts of media, endless games, endless apps. And so I would focus on, understanding the apps that they're actually interested in, as opposed to trying to understand every single thing that's out there. And that hopefully will save you a little bit of stress. Another form of mentorship is talking to them about your own experiences with digital media. So For example, if you've ever unfriended someone or hidden someone, why did you make that choice? If there's ever somebody who you blocked or you wish you hadn't given your phone number to that person, you know, what behaviors were they exhibiting that made you feel like you wanted to disconnect from them? These are things you can start to talk with young people about. You can talk with young people about, well, I didn't want to post that picture of the party because we couldn't invite everyone. I didn't want to make people feel bad. Starting to talk about what's public and what's private in terms of sharing on social media, those are good things to mentor kids on. Another area for mentorship can be in the gaming realm where you can ask your child if they know anyone who gets too mad when they game. Do you know someone who gets too upset when they game? Do they rage? Do they throw things? Do they hit? You know, these are behaviors we don't want to see our kids engage in, and they're also behaviors that kids feel bad when they engage in, or they don't want to play with friends who do these things. So these are things we can start to talk to kids about, and just opening up that question. You know, I recently asked that question of a group of sixth graders and said, you know, does anyone have a friend who gets too mad when they game? And one child raised his hand and said, sometimes the friend is me, right? So very, very self-aware kid. And that's a great opening to have some conversations. Okay, so there's 3 areas I wrote about in Screenwise: relationships, reputation, and time management. Your kid's probably going to run into some challenges with tackling at least one of these areas. So that's something to consider, you know, going forward. Is you're not a failure as a parent if your child runs into these challenges. This is just the reality of how our kids are experiencing their lives in this connected world. So one area in relationships that's so important, and also in time management for some of us, is texting. And a lot of us don't give texting its due. We don't really think about teaching our kids to text. They know how to read, so of course they can text. We don't really, we think a lot more often about gaming and social media as kind of attractive nuisances or things that we, you know, worry that our kids are doing too much of, and we barely think about texting at all in many cases. So we need to teach our kids how to text and what good texting looks like, what appropriate texting looks like, what we don't want to see them texting, and also what to do if they get into a conflict or a challenge with friends via text. That's really important. So texting is under considered. And so a lot of you have younger kids. I want you to start, if they're interested in texting, even before they get their own phone, perhaps letting them see some of your texts, perhaps letting them text one friend from your phone or even another family member from your phone as a practice. Training wheels long before they have a phone. This is something they could do, you know, a year in advance, for example. Just start to practice what to do if things go wrong, what to do if there's a misunderstanding. Texting is a very basic unit of conversation. And at this point, a lot of us are in workplace apps like Slack that are somewhat similar to texting. It's something we need to get right. And I think we could do a lot more to teach kids how to text. Conflicts between friends can be exacerbated when kids are texting because it's so easy to have a misunderstanding when we don't have tone of voice, when we don't have facial expression, when we don't have often like full punctuation, right? It's very difficult. It's hard to know when to speak next in a texting conversation if the other person seems to still be communicating. We don't know if is it my turn yet? And a lot of those clues about turn taking aren't there. That would be visible in a face-to-face conversation. So we need to help our kids. And when there is a misunderstanding, kids need to know that they need to bring it to a face-to-face, that they need to talk in person and work it out. And a lot of times when things are bad in a text, it's not going to get better. So if you're in a texting conversation that's not going well, it's not going to improve via text past a certain point. You need to talk in person or at least voice to voice to try to solve the problem. Okay, this is another issue, and I'm working on a new book about reputation and growing up in public now. And one of the things I've been saying for years, since even before Screenwise came out, is that we really need to be asking our kids permission before we share their picture. But a lot of families forget because their kids are cute and it's so much fun, and there's a huge culture of sharing our kids' pictures as kind of even part of good parenting. People sort of expect in many circles that we'll share pictures on Facebook or Instagram or other social spaces on the web, and we forget about our kids' need for privacy. Sometimes our kids are asking to be shared, so we're like, what's the problem? But in most cases, we should be thinking a little harder before we share our kids. And we've been also, we should be asking their permission. And even for kids who do want to be shared, we should be thinking, wow, you know, this 8-year-old wants to be shared, but is this really the best choice, or should I just share within the family? So these are some questions that are really important to consider. Okay, so before I go on, the other thing I want to say about consent is that it really is helpful for our kids if we're asking their consent, also because it reminds them that this is something that they should do with their peers. We don't want our kids just sharing pictures of their friends without asking permission. And we also don't want our kids not to know that they can withhold permission to share as well. So it's important that our children know that they can say to somebody, hey, don't share my picture. Kids think that's rude unless we let them know otherwise. I think that's really one of the most surprising things I found in my research is how much young people default into thinking that no privacy is what's polite and acceptable. And part of that is that because we've photographed them so much, we've actually habituated them to feeling like they don't deserve privacy, which is a real problem with oversharing. And again, I'm not saying that parents sharing their kids on social media is inherently bad, and I know a lot of families do. But asking your kids permission, giving yourself that pause yourself to say, is this a good idea? Certainly if your child is too young to ask permission, then better to be safe than sorry. You can always share in a smaller group. Or even some families are now sharing in password protected spaces. Nothing even on the cloud is completely safe, as we, I think, have all learned in recent years, but certainly sharing on Facebook/Instagram is one of the least private ways that we can be sharing. And maybe some of you work in those places, you know quite well like how this data is being used. And I think, you know, there's incredible value in sharing in these places or people wouldn't use them. Nonetheless, we don't necessarily have to default to this for our family album. And again, when kids are young and can't consent, it's worth really thinking about, is this such a good idea? How will they feel about this image later? And if in doubt, don't share it out. Okay, so I mentioned relationships, reputation, and time management. Here's an issue that we all will face at some point. Most of us have faced it dealing with social media, is that we will feel left out. We will feel a fear of missing out or feel actively excluded or passively excluded. We'll see images of people hanging out, doing fun things without us, going on vacation when we're not there, meeting their friends at the beach or the mall when we haven't been invited, at a birthday party we weren't part of. And it can be, frankly, a real bummer. So we need to teach our kids that this is not a tragedy. We feel for them, so we want to have empathy for them, but this isn't the time to like call the other kids' parents and be like, how could you? And not invite my kids skiing. Instead, we want to help our child feel better and disconnect from looking at the images. So we want to help our kid by offering them another activity, strongly encouraging them to unplug and not keep looking at the phone. When your phone is hurting you, making you feel bad, that's a good time to put it away. So skiing, again, you know, birthday parties, anything like that, if your child is sitting at home feeling bad, I would definitely try to help them find something else to do. It's a good time to be a B plan for your child. It's a good time to watch a movie with them, a good time to encourage them to do something that they love, read a book that they love, maybe even see other friends from outside the community that they are currently watching and feeling bad about. What you don't want is for your child to stay home watching someone else's slumber party in real time, because that is going to hurt. And it's also really giving up a lot of your own social power to turn it off and disengage. Okay, so our kids are also distracted from a very young age. They're trying to do their homework on tablets. Sometimes those tablets come from school. They're trying to look at multiple windows. They think that they can chat on their phone and do their work. This is all pretty much a disaster. This doesn't work. We can't multitask. All of us try it all day at work. It doesn't work. Our brains are toggling between activities, but they're not doing it effectively. It leads to fatigue. It takes 5 times as long to do simple tasks. And it just, you know, is pretty much a mess. Our kids don't know that though. Our kids actually believe that they're doing a really good job when they're multitasking. So we need to actually help them figure out that that's not working. And we need to take it out of the moral realm. Like, we're not morally judging them. We're not on some kind of moral high ground. We're not better than they are. We're distracted too. We just need them to have techniques and strategies. So I would look at how we're going to just sort of, slay the distraction dragon as a shared family project, and think about what you can do to help your kids focus even in the face of distraction. For some of us, it's closing windows. For some of us, it's turning off Wi-Fi. For some of us, it's using apps that actually help us focus. For some of us, it's putting in earplugs. There's a bunch of things you can do. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about YouTube. A lot of families have had concerning experiences with content anywhere on the internet, certainly, but YouTube is a big example of a place where kids may see things we wish they wouldn't see. So here you can see pandas. We all love baby pandas. What could be bad about pandas, right? And so we would happily walk away from maybe our 7-year-old and a friend, looking at pandas, and that would be great. That would be a great choice, except for the fact that if we look at these baby pandas, you can see over on the side that the next thing that the algorithm suggests is women in religious cults. Well, if I go and look at women in religious cults, I am probably going down a bad road. If I go and look at women in religious cults, I am probably going down a road I don't want my kid to go down, and I'm probably going down a road that I don't even personally want to go down. And if my 7-year-old, doesn't read well, they might or might not even really know what that is, and they probably don't have the right experience and context to understand women in religious cults. My 10-year-old might be like, ooh, women in religious cults, that's cool, click on that, right? But either way, whether my child has no clue what that means or has some sense that that's interesting content, maybe problematic content, we're going down a bad road, and the suggested videos next to the women in religious cults are probably not videos you want your child to see. So YouTube is kind of like a yellow light all the way through.
You okay? How many more minutes?
All the way through childhood, we want to be saying to our kids, if you're going to watch YouTube, I want to be in the room with you. And then as we get into the middle grades and middle school, if they do have their own devices and we allow them to have YouTube, I would really talk pretty explicitly with them about some of the content on YouTube. Again, whether it's, extremist content, whether it's racist content, whether it's violent content, whether it's pornographic content. These are all things our kids can see on YouTube, and the algorithm, unfortunately, can skew in those directions. There's a lot of data now that says actually that, for example, extremist videos that are kind of recruiting young people, frankly, are very heavily favored in some algorithms that are not necessarily like what you would expect. So you can go from one thing to another in ways that can take kids down some very troubling rabbit holes. I think none of us want our kids to learn about sex from porn. It's really important that we have pretty detailed and comprehensive conversations with our kids about pornography. Certainly if you're letting your child use YouTube unsupervised, I would talk to them about how they might find porn. And even if they are with you, it could happen literally while you're like in the next room. I mean, it's unfortunately so ubiquitous. And again, this is not really from even a moral standpoint. Like, I think it's really important that I'm clear that I'm not talking about censorship, and I'm not suggesting that I know what family values are around sexuality, and every family is different. But to make sure that we as parents are the source of information on tough topics with our kids, whether it's sexuality, money, death, God. These are questions that our kids may bring to Siri and Alexa and Google if we don't answer them. And sometimes they may go to Siri, Alexa, and Google before they come to us. So we need to make sure that we are clear that with our kids, that we want to be the people they ask about these tough, complex questions. And sometimes that's not where they start. So it's very important that they know that they can always talk to us. Okay, so earlier I mentioned gaming. I think it's very important to understand that gaming is part of kid culture now. Gaming is, ubiquitous. Again, it's super exciting. It's super immersive. It's not, it's not the Pac-Man that we played. It's not the arcade games. It's not even like the early Tetris and some other kind of home gaming systems that we may have had access to. It's a totally different world of gaming, and it's so immersive. It's so well designed. It's so great, and it's really, really hard to walk away from. And again, some of you may work designing some of these games. You may have played some of them. You may have a love-hate relationship with them. There's a lot to be said. There's a lot to be said for games today. And there's a lot to be said for the kinds of community that our kids can build, in these gaming communities. But there's also a lot of, yucky grown-up randos out there who might want to play with your kids. You might want to talk with your kids. So you want to understand a lot about not just the game itself, but also what kind of community your child is playing with and what kind of community they have access to via the game. Does your third grader know what to do if someone says, how old are you? Is your third grader going to be like mortally wounded, or not mortally wounded, but like emotionally, deeply scarred if somebody like swears in the game, or, says, something insulting. So these are some things to consider before you let your kid just like jump into a public server. For most kids, playing at home on a console, you would need a lot less supervision than if you're going to let them play in servers. Again, if you have a kid who's a gamer, I would really follow the games they are interested in playing, research the games they want to play. If your kid is all about Minecraft, you want to know all about Minecraft. If your kid is all about Roblox, you want to know about Roblox. You don't need to know everything about every game in the history of time just to understand your kid's world. I would definitely say if your child wants to be part of a gaming club, like the Minecraft clubs that some schools have, that's a really great way to play in the company of other people who are thinking about the game thoughtfully, maybe with some supervision at school. Those folks are also, again, if you do have like a Minecraft club in your community or something, the adults who run that are also going to be good resources for you as a parent to know, hey, what do these different modes of play mean? What's a safe way to build a server, maybe for my child and their friends, or my kid and their cousins. There are also families that just say, well, you're not going to play on a public server. We're going to play console games, just with friends, or you're going to play live with people. And that's fine too. So I think you want to look at one of the things, we talked about with the organizers of this event is every family is different. And every space we allow our kids, whether it's creating their own YouTube channel or, playing games on a public server, is also a tremendous parenting challenge that you have to deal with. And so for me, as a parent, for example, who travels a lot, maybe I say, well, I just can't handle that right now. Like, I don't have what it takes to supervise that. So we're just not going to do that right now. This is a project that demands more from me as a parent than I can give. So there are these other games that I feel safe with and that I know are still challenging and still fun that are going to work for you for now. And so again, every family is different, but know that there are other families in your community who may be grappling with some of the same questions. So I know this isn't a live event, but look around at school or reach out to friends in other communities who have kids who are your kids' age or slightly older to ask them some of the questions that you want to ask. I know a lot of people really loved Fortnite, but for some families, it just wasn't the right fit. The ways that people play Fortnite, which includes a kind of an appointment that you're setting with other people to play, and a very intense, the cycle of the game is rather short, but it's very intense. And for a lot of people, super immersive, very, very hard to walk away while you're playing. And that's something to really consider if you want your kid to get into something like that, or if that's going to be disruptive to family life. Okay, so another issue that I want to think about in relation to relationships, reputation, and time management is just boundaries. Whether it's who your child may be in contact with, if they have an email address, who may they share that email with, if they are sharing any content publicly, who are they sharing that with? These are all big questions that you want to ask yourself. Another way to think about boundaries is, how do you talk about boundaries in terms of who do you share your information with? Who do you post with? If someone writes you on LinkedIn, I know people who will accept every single LinkedIn person ever in the world, because theoretically it can't, who would it be bad to network with, right? LinkedIn isn't personal. I know other people who have a very high bar for who they'll accept as a LinkedIn contact, right? So these are very different philosophies and approaches to connecting with people. And this is a boundaries question, right? And there may be some advantage for some people into being quite flexible with who they connect with, because maybe they want to be really findable and discoverable. For other people, having higher boundaries and being more difficult to find might be better and might be preferable. So again, I'm not here to tell you what the boundaries are, as much as that all of us have boundaries, whether it's don't call me after a certain hour, whether it's I only give my email address to work contacts and not my phone number. But our kids are growing up in a world where we can't assume that they're going to just absorb our boundaries, because a lot of them were making those choices, like who we would give a phone number to versus email, or when we would contact someone. We're not really communicating that as directly to our children. So what we need to do is actually start communicating some of that directly to our children. You know, if someone calls you at a time that seems really inappropriate, let them know. Not the person who's calling necessarily, you might, it depends on the relationship, but let your child know, hey, that's kind of unexpected to hear from someone unless it's a real emergency, you know, late at night or during the dinner hour. And these are some times when we don't email or call people generally, that kind of thing. If we don't talk with our kids about boundaries, then they will do this. As soon as they start to text, they will text someone again and again and again when they don't hear from them. We all know someone who does this. And I think we all know that it's super annoying. We just need to teach kids about this. So kids will do this because they're new texters, and the first time they texted, the person got right back to them. And so they're sort of stunned when they don't hear back right away. So I let this be a cautionary snap. Here's an app kids I work with invented to stop you from texting someone again and again and again. I think we all know someone we want to get this app for. This is the app the kids I work with invented for their parents. Stop texting, enjoy life. I think we all know someone we probably want to get this for as well, but hopefully it's not you. Hopefully you sometimes have stopped texting and enjoyed life, right? But your kids perceive, and all of our kids perceive, that we're on our devices quite a bit, that we're connected quite a bit, and they don't love it. Honestly, they are frustrated. They would like us to, you know, put our phones down. They would like to connect with us. They don't want to repeat themselves when we ask how they're doing. And a lot of times kids will say, you know, oh, my mom asked how I was doing, or my dad asked how I was doing. And I told them how I was doing. And then I told them about my French test and how it was really hard. And then 5 minutes later, they're like, oh, did you take your French test? They weren't really listening. And that is very upsetting for kids. So I think it's really important that we set a good example. And by putting down our phones, again, we are showing them that that's how we interact. And that's something that then they'll expect from their peers, and that they'll know to do for their peers. That if you have a friend over, you don't spend that whole time on your phone with another friend. Here's another app that slightly older kids, these are middle schoolers, invented, that censors people and blocks bad words, censors people comment rude things. And this is really an app that's about civility. And I think we can all agree that we're in a kind of a moment of where civility is a little bit in crisis in our country and our society. And as parents, we want to teach our kids to do better. We want them to respond, whether it's someone they know personally or don't know, whether it's someone they, you know, are comfortable with or not comfortable with, whether it's an idea they agree with or not, they should still respond in a civil way. Right? Or walk away if the conversation has really degenerated and there's no way to engage civilly. I think we've all walked away from a few, you know, dumpster fires on Twitter or Facebook. And when, again, that's something we can teach our kids to do. Like, you don't even always have to pile on and say, I disagree. Sometimes it's best just to disengage completely. Online is a different kind of place than in person. You know, in person, it would be a little weird to just walk away from a conversation without a closer. But depending on who's participating online, you know, whether it's Facebook for us, you know, older people, for our children, it might be a group text. Sometimes walking away is the way to go. And it's important that our kids know that that's an option, and that's actually what we expect of them if things decline in civility to the point where, you know, it's just impossible to engage in a positive way. It's better to just not engage. And I think that's where sometimes we don't help our kids understand that in advance. And our kids would really benefit from that mentorship. Okay. A lot of us worry that our kids will see explicit content. I already talked about pornography on YouTube. I know a lot of our kids are really young, and so maybe we wouldn't think of them sending like a suggestive photo. But what I'm hearing is even elementary school students to some degree are doing this. It's not very common at any age. So, most of the research suggests it's actually pretty rare for kids to send an explicit photo. But when it does happen, everyone hears about it. So I want to talk about it because if it does sort of happen in the community, your kid will probably hear rumors about it. Just like anything else we talk about with sexuality, consent is so critical. And so sharing someone's photo without their consent is a huge no-no. It's obviously a huge legal problem as well, but I really want to focus on the sort of social and emotional and ethical issues, which are, considerable with this. And we really, again, by you might think like, what does me, not sharing my kid's photo on social media have to do with sexting? Well, just this idea of consent, or asking your child before you share their photo is letting them know that they have a right to say no. When someone who, is interested in them down the road, or someone who's just trying to get, frankly, as many nude pictures as possible, it's not always someone who's specifically interested in your child, might ask them for a naked picture or a suggestive picture. It's great for your kid to have had some practice exerting their boundaries, saying, no, I don't want to share that, or that's private, or heck no. And having, some feelings about it. That's good. And you also want them to know they can come to you. And if they do share a picture, because remember their prefrontal cortex isn't, fully formed, like, so say like down the road in middle school or high school, maybe they will share a picture. Hopefully it won't happen. Don't want to scare you, but if it happens, you want them to be able to talk to you. You don't want to have given them such negative messaging about this practice that they can't talk to you, because if there is a picture out there, you will do everything you can to help your kid mitigate the consequences and dangers that that picture poses, even if you really wish it hadn't happened. And so I think it's important for our kids to know that we're always on their side and that we'll always help them, even if they've made mistakes. And that to some degree, I wouldn't necessarily frame it this way to kids, but it's inevitable that our kids will make mistakes, whether it's saying something rude in a group text that they thought was funny, whether it's sharing a picture of something other kids weren't invited to. It may be a small faux pas or a big one, but for sure, we want our kids to know that they can work through it, that they can move forward. We don't want to teach our kids that any of their digital missteps are, them falling off a high wire act that they can never recover from. Repair is so important. So I've been working on this new book about reputation and growing up in public. And one of the things that's so scary about the digital age is that, we don't want to be searchable for our worst moments. So think about the kids who were, we don't even know, impulsive enough, dumb enough, maybe racist enough, but the more I read about the case, the more I'm not even sure about that. In Baraboo, Wisconsin, where you saw those juniors in their prom photo is all the young men, and they're all making what looks like a Nazi salute in this image, or most of them are, and I'll come back to that, right? Most of them are, a few of them aren't, a few of them are doing other ambiguous gestures, some have their hands firmly at their sides. So you have this moment, it's very hard to understand the context for where the photo was produced. It goes viral. The whole town is incredibly upset, and parents are very upset that their kids were in the photo, but many of them encourage their kids not to come forward and apologize because they didn't want their names associated with the photo. I think we live in a world where we have to really think hard about searchability. It's true when you have a name like Devorah Heitner, like, I'm so searchable. Obviously, it's always me. It's not like that. Oh, that other Devorah Heitner, that's her. It's me. But at the same time, so I understand parents' hesitancy about their kids coming forward, but they denied their kids, the parents who wouldn't let their kids apologize, the kids who wanted to apologize to the Jewish families in town and to other families that were hurt by the gesture, by the photo. They wanted to be accountable. They wanted to come forward, and the parents who prevented them, I think, denied their children an opportunity to repair. So your kids probably are going to be documented in a viral moment doing something that makes them look like they are hateful, right? But they may be documented saying something dumb. They may have a misspelling on Twitter. They may, share a reply all with the wrong people. We all do something that we wish we could undo in the digital world, from the most minor, CC, reply all mistakes, to something much more major, like being photographed doing something that, gives the appearance that, that we have, really hateful views, right? That's a huge range that I just described there. And again, most of us, our mistakes are going to be more minor, But at the same time, we don't want to give kids the message that just because they're, yes, public and permanent, doesn't mean people can't move forward. And if you do have a situation where your child wants to move forward, I mean, for sure, go get your legal advice on this. And if you have an attorney in the situation, like, get their advice. But I would say, if a kid wants to be accountable, let them be accountable and let them move forward, because otherwise you're stuck. And so for those kids in that photo in Wisconsin, the kids who did apologize, even though their names are now associated with the event and searchable, I would imagine that their healing is more complete, and that also the full circle of their apology matters more to their public image than simply that one moment in the photograph. So it is really important to think about what repair looks like. You know, whether you've texted someone too many times, whether you've hurt someone's feelings, what does it look like to show up and ask that person for forgiveness? What does it look like to not make the same mistake again? Maybe it's that you were texting too much and your kid was trying to talk to you, and you demonstrate repair and accountability by not doing it again the next time. It's not just apologizing, but it's by, you know, doing something differently in the future. So I want to start to move toward Q&A, but what I want to say is, you have wisdom, right? Your kids have this incredible facility with tech, and some of you probably do too. But whether or not you feel like you have tons of tech facility and knowledge, or you're only moderately sort of good at tech, you have lived experience. You've offended someone and moved forward in the relationship. You've been offended by someone and moved forward in the relationship. You've had conflict and worked it out. You've been left out of things or left someone out and moved forward. These are the experiences our kids are having, and it's very important for us to feel confident about mentoring them through these experiences, which, yes, they're having them in this new media space, but the experience itself of growing up now is not so entirely different. So I think it's really important as parents that we trust our wisdom and we don't negate our knowledge just because our kids are growing up in a different time. So let me summarize, and then I would love to take some questions. So we want to mentor our kids more than we monitor. Boundaries are clarity, and sometimes our kids should also be able to use us, especially in elementary and middle school, as a boundary to say, oh, my dad looks at my phone, so if you keep saying these bad words, I'm going to get in trouble, or my mom looks at my phone, so please don't text me in the middle of the night. So those are other boundaries. We want our kids to work it out face-to-face when they're texting. If things go wrong, definitely talk in person. And ultimately, none of us want our kids to need an app to get our attention, right? The Stell app hopefully isn't needed in your homes. So, ask your kids, if you're really brave, you can ask them tonight or tomorrow, what is the thing that I do with tech that you don't like? Because if we're going to talk about their habits that we don't like, it's good for them to be able to talk with us about maybe some ways that we use our computers, our phones, in ways that frustrate them. So those are good conversations to have. Okay, so you can ask some questions in the chat. You can also grab Screenwise on Amazon or your local bookstore. And you can tweet at me at Devorah Heitner if you want. Although if you have a question now, I'm not on Twitter at the moment. I'm going to be not going to multitask. So if you have a question later, you just want to tweet to say hi or follow me there for digital citizenship tips, that's great. But I'm going to look for questions in the chat and not on Twitter. So let me see. Where's the chat?
This is Sarah. I have been tracking the questions as they've been coming in. And I wanted to actually start with a question that was relevant to the last, one of the last things you were talking about when somebody posted a racist or anti-Semitic image and how the concerns that you were raising in relation to it. And I guess the question that I wanted to raise was, there was an incident in Albany a few years ago where there were students in the high school posted racist images. And I think the question that you raised has to do with the reputation of the people posting it and how to respond to that. And I guess I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about what you would suggest, both on the perpetration and receiving end, and how we talk to kids about what happens when they do racist things or they do anti-Semitic things or sexist things, and how to be mindful of that and how to also perhaps intervene when they see that happen.
Yeah, and I think that's a really, I've written a little bit about this and I can share. I wrote an article um, at the end of 2016 when there was this increase initially in hate crimes in schools. And one of the things, of course, we have to do in a school environment or in a community is make sure everyone is safe. And so if someone is wearing something or saying something in school or writing graffiti, for example, in school that is making the community unsafe, the first thing we need to do is address the safety of those students and also think about what are some ways we can take alliance and support with the people who've been targeted. So for example, in Duluth, Minnesota, Muslim students were targeted and other students did solidarity with their Muslim classmates to let them know that it was safe to come to school. It's just one example, but so it's very important that our initial actions are about the safety of the people who were targeted, not necessarily the people who are the perpetrators, right? It's like both and. The Baraboo case that I specifically am writing about didn't become public until 8 months. It was a little bit of a weird, I mean, not just a weird and quirky situation, I'm researching it now, but because the photo didn't become public initially, there wasn't necessarily a widespread feeling of unsafety in the moment the photo was taken, because literally nobody who wasn't there even knew it happened. And some people who were there didn't even quite process what happened, because it was this moment in time of a photographer doing this weird thing of suggesting the boys make this gesture. I mean, very, very odd. And the photographer was a parent, like it gets weirder and weirder. So that's kind of an unusual situation because the school environment there was already pretty unsafe for many groups, it sounds like, from my research. But when a specific act targets a group or a group of several groups of people, it's really important to make the community safe, show up with solidarity for those people who are targeted, and then talk to the people if we know who the perpetrators are, because that's not always possible. If you know who they are, then we want to find out what they were thinking, and not in the sense of like, shake them by the shoulders, like, what the hell were you thinking? But really, what were they thinking? There were middle schools around the country where kids were chanting, "Build the wall," and their classmates were crying. And these little 11 and 12-year-olds, knew that they had touched a nerve, but they didn't really understand fully what they were saying or what it meant. And so I think it's important that we don't just shut down that conversation. We do need to shut it down because obviously the kids were unsafe and it was targeting people and it was terrible. But we also need to find out, what do you believe that means, right? We need to ask the hard questions of the kids who are doing it, because if we just shut it down, some of those kids will get driven further into researching and perpetuating those beliefs, and we'll never really question them in a deep way. So we need to create a space, as hard as it is, where that gets questioned. And the challenge with social media is it's very easy to document, share, and disseminate. So again, if you're 11-year-old, to come back to the perpetrators of these troubling actions, what if your 11-year-old was viral on YouTube for shouting, "Build the wall," and we have facial recognition software? Like, at what age do we say, like, maybe that shouldn't be on YouTube? Like, as bad as that action was, and as much as that school needs to shut it down, do 5 million people really need to see that? Is that really a good idea, right? Documenting it, again, when students document those moments, like where they're targeted, like the student who documented the "Build the Wall" chant, you can understand why that student documented it, to hold people accountable, to make the school safe, to make adults aware, because sometimes situations aren't supervised. But having millions of people see it may not be such a good idea for a variety of reasons. And so that's where social media and shareability get tricky. So I don't want to derail us too much on like a hate crimes discussion, but yes, this is something we do need to think about. And on the other hand, the rapid circulation of images can make it really easy to also, point fingers at people. And we need to think about what we're doing to everyone when we do that.
Thank you. So people have started sending in questions, and I'm going to go through them in the order that they're coming in. So the first question was, do you suggest that parents watch shows or play games with kids, or watch them in advance, or play them in advance? So is it, in terms of the monitoring, do you try it out before you let your kids watch it?
When I say mentoring over monitoring, I would say definitely watching with them some of the time. None of us have time to log the kind of recreational screen time that our kids do. Right. And with a game, if you're unsure if you're going to greenlight the game, you may want to play it in advance, watch a YouTube video of gameplay. read about the game. You may not want to buy the game if you're not sure about it, to play it yourself, play it at a friend's house maybe. But for sure with TV, movies, we probably don't have time to pre-screen everything our kids are going to watch, but watching it with them, I have very rarely had to turn something off. There have been a couple of times where a show was like, wow, I thought this show was okay, but this is a lot of torture, and like you're in third grade and I know you know about violence, but this is too much and it's too intense and it's too scary and we're not gonna watch it anymore. So ideally, shutting down a show in the middle obviously is a big stand to take. It's not something, getting up and I've never gotten up and walked out of a movie theater. Usually I know a little bit more about the movies we're seeing. Every once in a while I've had like an inner, like, oh wow, didn't know it was gonna go there. The previews is one example where I think we've all been there with like, maybe you're seeing a movie, then the movie, it was a good choice for your family, but the previews weren't. I think pre-screening everything is just a very high bar. I don't think that's something you're going to want to do. And it's also not really that fun if you know everything that's going to happen if you're trying to watch a family movie. But definitely, if in doubt, do a little bit of reading about a show. Watching it with your kids is a great opportunity to discuss the issues that come up, whether it's gender issues, whether it's plot issues, whether it's friendships, issues. Like, wow, they were really loyal on that show, or wow, they really turned on each other on that show. Like, have you ever seen something like that happen? And it's not that, again, every moment of TV watching with our kids or game playing with our kids doesn't have to be this explicitly educational experience. Just spending time with our kids is good for them and good for us and good for our relationship. So I'm not suggesting that, every single moment turns into this sort of pontification, but certainly as we watch more issue-oriented shows with our tweens and our teens, there are opportunities to talk about politics, to talk about pressures of peer issues, all kinds of things that can come up.
Great, thank you. So what's the best way to handle tech envy?
So when other kids have what you want, oh my gosh, as my kid, there's so many things he wants that he doesn't have that people in our community have. And I'm sure he has many things to say, but he's in bed, hopefully. I think it's really hard. I mean, especially if you're pretty committed to waiting on something or skipping it completely, but your kid will be okay. I mean, just like anything. I mean, we live in an apartment. My kid also has house envy, oh, well, it's like, that's life. I mean, I don't mean to be flip about it because your kid might feel like the sort of social world is really dependent on this stuff. And so if there's something very specific that your kid wants access to because it's the space that kids are communicating, like say all the kids are communicating in a certain app, that doesn't mean you have to allow it, but I would think about what's your plan what's your workaround? Are you going to let them use that app to make plans? Would you let them use your phone to use that app or your device to use that app to make plans in certain situations? Would you push back on someone? What if the team that your child is on, the coach for some wacky reason wants to communicate on some app that, you don't want to allow? Can you push back and say, this is not a really great way to communicate? And by the way, my child isn't allowed to use this app and this isn't going to, it's going to really exclude them. And maybe the adult can make a different, choice. If it's just something that's exciting, like, a specific gaming device or something else, I would definitely work with your kid to help them process it. But also the school of life is sometimes not having the things that some people have. If you know other parents who are holding out or choosing or can't or won't or don't want, because those are all reasons, that device, if your kids can have some time with those kids so that they have some experiences with people who are also don't have whatever it is. Again, whether that's an Xbox, whether that's their own laptop, whatever, their own smartphone. I think that is helpful. I think it can be legitimately very tough to be the last in a community. And I think parents who are going to get their kids the latest, greatest should be thinking about that a little bit. And so ideally we're all considering what other folks are doing, not in the sense that we're judging them, but just in the sense of like, oh, if I'm going to get my kid a smartphone, ahead of some of their friends, what am I going to do to make sure that they are still inclusive of those friends? Maybe they don't take it to those friends' houses on a sleepover, or maybe they don't need it at school. Right. So those are some things we can do to kind of reduce the challenges that kids experience.
Great, thank you. And how does the school district or school site play a role in limiting screen time, but balance it with preparing students for functioning in the new tech age?
Well, I think screen time itself is a little bit of an old school term that a lot of us still use, including myself. Sometimes I'm not, saying like, don't use it because I don't have the perfect answer, but it's hard when everything goes into that bucket because of course, learning activities, communication activities, creative activities, and leisure activities are all screen time, but we think differently about things when our kids are programming in Scratch versus when they're gaming versus when they're doing homework versus when they're composing music versus when they're emailing, a friend versus emailing maybe their teacher, right? All of those different activities could be screen time. So I think we instead need to look at the quality of the experience and what it's bringing to them and how to balance that.
Great. And so I'm going to ask two questions together since they go together. What are ways you've seen other parents, what are ways you've seen parents gain more competence with mentoring their children with technology, and especially for parents who may not be tech savvy or not on social media? Are there good ways to learn enough to mentor and engage, but not ourselves go down a digital rabbit hole or spend hours reading kids' phones?
Yeah, I mean, think of like the rest of us, like in the last few years of our lives and where that's gone and how happy you are that you're not on social. I mean, in some ways, right? And I use social every day and love it. And there's a lot to like about it. I certainly feel like my personal learning network on Twitter is really amazing and all that. But, at the same time, like, I think we could all do with like one less update, right? Yeah, I mean, I would read a book like Screenwise or, any book about kids in tech that you like that is not too scary. Like, I think there are books that are out there and you can kind of tell usually by the titles, is this a book that's just going to scare me or is this empowering? Talk to other families, talk to older kids in your family too. If you have like nieces and nephews in college or in their 20s who are like really into this stuff, have them help you make some decisions. Even if you really want to outsource your mentoring, to those people, maybe they can help you. Certainly if you want to monitor your kids, it's your prerogative. I don't necessarily suggest that you need to do that using apps or anything else. But if you have a kid on social media and you don't want them just out there on your own, but you don't have accounts, maybe you have an older cousin or someone else friend them or connect with them or follow them so that you feel like there's some sort of like voice of reason, like someone who's not, just in the sandbox with them, who's, you would trust to like that person's just presence may be a good reminder for your child to make good decisions, and B, maybe if that person sees a red flag in your child's community, they'll let you know. So again, the best is if your kid is talking to you, because often you won't even know how to interpret those red flags. Like it really takes a lot to see something in social media where it's like evidently bad. So the most important thing is line of communication. Even if your kid is on a bunch of apps or games that you're not on, if they can talk to you, then you're able to mentor them even if you're not in those spaces.
Okay, I'm going to switch gears a little bit, but go back to a conversation we were having before. Or more along those lines, there was a lot of writing last year about alt-right subtle efforts to indoctrinate young white teens to be more open to racist and sexist ideologies. So some of the things you were referencing in relation to YouTube.
Yeah.
Are there specific apps or influencers you tell parents of teens or preteens to sort of use to help their kids steer clear of those, or to notice or things that we could tell them might be warning signs? I mean, it seems clear if something pornographic comes up, for example, but how do we help kids steer clear of the racist and sexist ideologies?
That's a great question. One of the suggestions in one of the articles that I read that I really appreciated was that there were just certain code words that folks are using on some of those, like talking about people being triggered, talking about them being snowflakes. Anytime someone's using that kind of language, I would really question whether I want my kid watching. I mean, the thing is, some of these people are really subtle, but they might lead to other videos or other YouTubers who have even more extreme views. So someone who, I mean, it's not necessarily that, your kid is like watching, I don't know, like some really cool TikTok video, and then the next thing that pops up is like, come join, white supremacists in the woods, and here's some guns. I mean, it doesn't go like right for, it's much more kind of subtle, and conspiracy theories, but tweens and teens, especially when they're isolated or feel a little bit alienated, which can really easily happen at that age, are very responsive to like, nobody gets this but you, everybody's been brainwashed but you, like, and we see it that way. And there's evidence that these folks are even recruiting in places where they know people are isolated. Yes, I think a few years ago I would have said, like, I don't want to strike fear into the hearts of parents because I'm really a very tech positive parent. But yeah, if your kid's on Quora, if your kid's on Reddit, they could be reading great stuff, and I'm not assuming that, everyone shares the same sort of political perspective. But if your kid is going down a road that concerns you, I would intervene, and I would do it pretty assertively, not just like, hey, what's that, but really looking at it and even having them potentially read. Like, there was a great article in the Washingtonian about a kid who was kind of recruited and then went to a rally and kind of saw some of the behaviors of the people there and was turned off. So that was a good outcome, I think, in my humble opinion, a good outcome. But it's very scary that these folks have so much intense access and that there's no vetting going on. So even, a television channel, or anything that's been through broadcast, theoretically, there's some kind of vetting, there's a group of people making a decision. And, back in the 70s, someone had to decide if the Archie Bunker show could allow a toilet to flush off screen or if that would be too distasteful to viewers, right? So a group of people got together in a room and said, yeah, we can do that sound effect of a toilet flushing, off screen. Like, you don't see the bathroom, nothing, you just hear the sound effect. And this was like a big controversial thing. And I think we would all be pretty thrilled if the worst thing our kids could see was hearing the sound of a toilet flushing off screen. We'd be like, yeah, that's okay with me. When I ask people our age, what were you not allowed to watch? And people talk about, from various generations, like Three's Company, The Love Boat, or MTV, I would say we'd all be like pretty much jumping up and down. Like, if the worst thing my kid could see on the internet is like Madonna in a pointy bra or, Three's Company, I would be pretty psyched about that. That would be okay with me. Compared to, like, say, an ISIS beheading, I'd be like, show Madonna in a pointy bra. Like, so I think it's really important to understand, like, the difference between the media landscape of our childhood, whether that was in the 60s, 70s, 80s, or 90s, right? Because parents are a huge variety of generations right now. Whatever that media landscape was, what we have now is very different.
Great. So I think we're closing in. I have two more questions.
Okay.
So the first is, do you have any specific recommendations for parents with the youngest children, 0 to 5, in regards to navigating apps and screen time?
Yes, I love the Fred Rogers Center, and they have some really nice, and also the National Association for Early Childhood Education have some really nice recommendations for young people. And I would say in general, that's really a tablet age, but some of the apps are much better than others. And I'll also just caution parents of the 0 to 5 set and older that anything in the education store, in the app store, that doesn't mean it's good. It could be junk or it could be wonderful. And paying 99 cents for it doesn't mean it's good. Having it be free doesn't mean it's bad. There's really nothing that substitutes for, like, asking your librarian or asking your friend who's a developer or reading lists in parenting magazines and getting some good recommendations for apps, because the bar to entry is low and there's a lot of junk out there, and your kid is not going to, kids learn a lot more from experience, and in 0 to 5 sensory experience is really great. And we don't want them spending necessarily tons of time on tablets, but there are some really great apps for kids that age. Certainly in 3 to 5 or 2 to 5, there's some great apps. So why not, use them, but that the fact that they're in the education store doesn't make them great. And so we want to look at what's developmentally appropriate, what's interesting. There's some apps that I really love for that age, but I'll definitely do some research. And better to find 3 apps that your kids love than 10 junky apps that are boring that they'll be done with in 5 minutes.
Great. So this is the last question. What about interacting with families with different rules around screen time? Any suggestions on how to navigate that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say just like you would navigate rules about food or anything else, you know, if it's very different to the point where you don't feel, for example, like you want your child at that person's house unless you're there too. Like say, you know, that, you know, whatever, the kids are very young and they go with totally unrestricted access to devices that are connected to the internet. Last time your kid was there, they did see some really disturbing content and you don't feel like the parents are open to doing something different next time, maybe that kid has to come to your house. But that's pretty extreme. Most families can collaborate. I certainly have friendships with people whose kids are allowed to play some games. My kid doesn't really play. At a certain point, your child, it's going to be on your child to decide, am I going to break the rules here? Am I allowed to play the game when I'm here, but just we're not getting it at home? Like, what's the deal? I had a great conversation with a very religious father about Grand Theft Auto. And he was like, I know my 12-year-old's going to play it at other kids' houses. We don't allow it here. So I told him, like, look, if you play it at your friend's house on a sleepover, just don't go in the strip club, you know, which is like, that was their compromise. And if they're on the same page and the dad also knows the game well enough to know that there's a strip club. Yes, there's also a strip club. It's a game about stealing cars and there's a strip club. It's what's not to love about this, right? Of course, a lot of people maybe don't want their kids to play the game, but I thought this dad really, by knowing what was in the game, could have a more realistic conversation with his son about the ways he expects him to behave. Whereas I think, you know, if your kid is 12 and they're going to someone else's house and there's something on offer there that they like and that you're not allowing them to do, chances are they might do it. A lot of kids would have a hard time resisting that. So again, you have to decide, are you going to talk to the other family? Or are you going to say, hey, we really don't want our kids watching that? If your kids are younger, you can say like, oh, if they watch scary movies, they'll get a nightmare, whatever. You can kind of put it on yourself, you know, oh, I'm anxious about this, you know, whatever. Certainly your prerogative when kids come to you, you can unplug them all, like take away those smartphones at a sleepover, you know, do what you need to do. There's probably a lot more harm than good that can come from kids having connected access. And an overnight, because kids' inhibition tends to decrease, so that's a good time probably to unplug them at a certain hour. These are all steps that you're free to take. You do not have to agree with everyone, but we can all do this together. And I think as much as we can come to other parents in a collaborative way of like, how can we help our kids? You know, it's really, it's tough, but it's possible. And I think most families really appreciate also when we're communicating, as long as we don't seem like we're, you know, judging them or, you know, talking badly about them. So yeah, I'm trying to think of other examples of this in my own life, from my own parenting, even, you know, trick-or-treating, you know, with kids in elementary school where I didn't expect anyone to have a phone. My kids certainly didn't at that point have a phone. But then, you know, one of the kids kind of wandered off and it was sort of handy that he had a phone. We called him. So it was like, okay. So, and I got to talk to his parent about that. So that was, you know, that was a situation where I was like, okay, this family's making a really different choice than my family, but also, you know, maybe knowing more about their kid or their family structure would help me understand why. And it's also really fine. Like everyone can do things differently and we can all be friends. So if you do have real safety concerns, that might be a kid that needs to play at your house or meet up at the playground, though you certainly are never obligated to send your child into a situation that you think is unsafe or really goes against what you're trying to do.
Great. So I want to thank Dr. Heitner for giving us this webinar. I know that I learned things and I both feel a little bit more less concerned about some of the things I was concerned about, and then have new things to think about in terms of how I monitor my kids' screen time, monitor and mentor in relation to screen time. So thank you for that. And I wanted to thank everybody who joined our webinar. This is our first time doing this. And we invite feedback both on the process of having a webinar and whether this is a good way to do parent eds at Marin, and also any feedback on the content. You can email any of the diversity committee coordinators either individually, or you can email us. Kavita just put the email address up on the chat, but it's marindiversitycommittee@gmail.com. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Dr. Heitner.
Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.